I don't know what burdens you're bearing. I don't know what grief or fear or anxiety or confusion you may be feeling right now. But I do know this. You need to look up instead of giving up. Don't give up. Look up. No matter what you're facing right now, you need to do the same thing that Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men did when they felt overwhelmed at the very first Christmas. You know, we have this idealized and romanticized picture in our minds of how everything was just sweet and non-stressful leading up to Jesus' birth. That's far from how those involved in the first Christmas actually felt. The very first Christmas didn't start out being a very merry Christmas. The truth is, everybody involved at the first Christmas was pretty stressed out by the news. And their first reactions were not positive, not one of them. Let me just review how those first people felt at the first Christmas. First, how did Mary initially react to the news that she was going to be the mother of the Son of God? The Bible tells us that when the angel first appeared to Mary and explained what was about to happen, all she could think of was 1,000 questions, and I don't blame her. What? Why me? How? When? Where? How could this possibly happen? What am I supposed to tell my fiance? What am I supposed to tell my parents, my friends? Who's going to believe me? You know, actually, Mary's initial reaction was quite normal. If you're taking notes, you might write this down. Mary was confused and worried. And believe me, if an angel showed up to you and told you that, you'd be confused and worried too. In Luke chapter 1, verse 29, it tells us this: confused and deeply disturbed, Mary tried to think of what the angel's words might possibly mean. Well, I guess so. By the way, the Greek word used here, where it says confused, it's only used one time in the Bible. It is the word in Greek, diatarasso, and it means perplexed, anxious, completely shaken, troubled. That's how she felt. She didn't feel merry at Merry Christmas. She felt confused and troubled. Well, how about Joseph? How did Joseph initially react to the news? Well, the Bible tells us that when Mary explained that she was pregnant, but she had not been unfaithful to Joseph, that she was still a virgin, and that God was the father of the baby, what do you think his initial reaction was? Well, it was a complete normal reaction too. You might write this down. Joseph was hurt and brokenhearted. Well, of course he was. Would you believe that story if your fiance told that to you? Joseph felt betrayed. He felt lied to. He felt like a fool. He felt cheated on. He felt embarrassed. He didn't know what to say to all of his friends. You know, my girlfriend, my fiance's pregnant, but we haven't had a relationship. And by the way, she's claiming the father's God. He's deeply hurt. He's deeply disappointed. He wants to be done with Mary, quietly and quickly. The Bible tells us this. Matthew chapter 1, verse 19 says, Joseph decided to break off the engagement quietly so as to not disgrace Mary publicly. For Joseph, this whole thing is just too unbelievable to be true. I mean, what a preposterous lie his fiancée is telling him. No, Mary's confused and troubled, but Joseph is hurt and brokenhearted. He's not having a Merry Christmas either. What about the shepherds? How did the shepherds initially react to the news? Well, the Bible tells us exactly how they felt at first. Luke chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. It says this: that night, there were shepherds out in the field nearby watching over their flocks. Suddenly, the night sky lit up, and an angel of the Lord appeared, and God's bright glory blazed all around them, and they were, get this, terrified. Terrified. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. The shepherds were scared to death. They're not happy. They're not having a Merry Christmas. They are scared to death. And by the way, the Greek word here is the word phobeo. We get the word phobia from it. These guys panicked. They're filled with fear. They're looking for some place to hide. Their hearts are pounding. They're sweating bullets. Some of them probably are looking for an outhouse. They're petrified with anxiety. In other words, when the shepherds first heard the news, they freaked out. They're not happy either. Now, what about the wise men? These are the last guys in the story. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 tells us this. Now, after Jesus was born, some wise men traveled a long way from the east and finally arrived in Jerusalem. So when these wise men finally show up in Jerusalem and their caravan pulls into their destination, how do they feel? Well, first, let me remind you who these guys were. I told you last weekend that they were likely royal advisors and scholars from either Babylon, which is now in Iraq, or from Persia, which is now called Iran. And they were scientists of that day. They were the best educated people in the world. The Magi were the highly educated people. They served the royal courts, and they were very wealthy. They're the exact opposite of the shepherds, who are stinky and smelly and poor. These guys are astronomers. They studied the stars, but they also studied literature and languages and mathematics and history. And they weren't kings. We talk about the three kings. First, it doesn't say there were three. It just says there were three gifts. So we don't know that there are three. It could have been 10. And it doesn't, and they certainly weren't kings. They served the kings. They served the emperors as advisors. In the Bible, in the book of Daniel, it tells us that Daniel had been trained as one of these wise men, one of these magi. Now, how long did it take for them, the wise men, to get to Jerusalem, whether they were from Iraq or from Iran, which we don't know? Well, if you go straight across the desert, which, by the way, you couldn't do, that's about 1,300 kilometers. But if you took the ancient trade route, it was more like 2,000 kilometers. The Bible tells us that when Ezra led a caravan from Babylon back to Jerusalem, it took him 4 months. But that included women and children, so that would have slowed him down. But the point I'm making is that these guys have been traveling on camels through the desert for at least 2 to 3 months. This is not easy traveling. This is not catching a plane or a train or driving in a car. And they're on camels for 2 or 3 months. It's mostly desert. They pass through foreign countries, perilous terrain, all kinds of bandits. It's hot. It's sweaty. It's tiring. And it certainly wasn't a snowy white Christmas. So how do you think the wise men felt when they finally reached their destination? Well, the likely answer is this. You might write this down. The wise men were exhausted. They're exhausted. And I have no doubt that many times during their long and arduous journey, they probably asked themselves, is this worth it? I mean, why are we going to all this effort? Are we actually going to see anybody? Is this just a big joke? Maybe we should give up. Maybe we should give up on this idea. Maybe we should turn back. Maybe we should quit the journey. It's just too hard. We have no guarantee of a payoff. So, let's just review our cast of characters at the first Christmas. The Mary, Joseph, the shepherds, and the wise men. Okay. They're confused. They're worried. Some are hurt and brokenhearted, fearful, scared, and exhausted. And the bottom line is this. At one point, every one of the characters in the Christmas story felt like giving up. Have you ever felt like that? I'm sure you have. I am absolutely certain that many of you are feeling one of these emotions at Christmas. You may be feeling confused or worried or hurt or brokenhearted. You may be feeling fearful or just exhausted for personal reasons. What does this Christmas story have to say to you? Well, here's the key. Here's the key to less confusion and more clarity. Less stress and more peace. The key to healing your hurt or your broken heart. To replacing your fears with confidence. To replenishing your exhausted soul. What is the key? Do what these people did when they felt like giving up.
This is Pastor Rick's Daily